Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the New Mainstream podcast,
where we explore the impact of multicultural consumers on marketing and media.
I'm your host, Mario Carrasco, and co-founder of Think Now. Hi, listeners. Welcome back to the New Mainstream podcast. I'm your host, Mario Carrasco, and today we have incredible guests joining us, Ryan Anderson, VP of Global Research and Insights at MillerKnoll, here to discuss career journey, inclusive design, and future of work. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Mario. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, likewise. So before we jump in, I saw you just got back from vacation. Can you share where did you go anywhere, or was it a staycation?
I did not go anywhere, and it was not a relaxing staycation. My middle daughter graduated from high school, and my wife works at the school where she goes. So it was a series of open houses and planning our own. So yeah, just took a little bit of time to deal with logistics and centerpieces and food. So it was fun, but it wasn't exactly a typical vacation.
I hear you. All right. Well, congratulations to your family and your daughter. That's exciting.
Thank you.
So before we dive into your day-to-day there at MillerKnoll, one of my favorite parts of the podcast is just learning how did you get into research and insights? I found the vast majority of people, have kind of stumble into it. Were you one of those people, or were you interested in design from early on?
I was not. No, and your timing is perfect because this week is the 30th anniversary since I first started as an intern in our industry, which is generally just considered contract furniture. But no, as a kid, I was really into government. Like I wanted to go into civics, politics, whatever. And I went and interned at the Michigan House of Representatives, and partly because the physical environment was so oppressive. I mean, it was just a miserable office space. I was like, geez, this kind of sucks. And one of the local congressional representatives had actually been in marketing at Herman Miller years before. And someone said, have you ever looked into marketing? And so I talked to a few folks, and with very little information, got into a marketing career. That's what I studied at Michigan State. I spent a lot of years in it. And it was really the research side of marketing, market research, and looking into unmet customer needs and thinking about new innovation strategies that full on got me over to the research and innovation side of our industry.
Oh, that's incredible. And congratulations, 30 years. And I'm curious, have you done any work in the government space, like a full circle moment where you're looking at workplace designs there, or not yet?
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, actually. So when it comes to various workplace initiatives, that includes both work from home and corporate offices. Our federal government is actually quite progressive and have done some really cool things. So yes, I have worked with them. I thought you were going to ask me if I got back into politics. And my short answer there is that I'm very happily involved in local government with things like the future of our local transit, our master plan, some of that sort of stuff. But beyond that, I'm pretty much solidly in the private sector.
Nice. Well, thank you for that background. So, diving a little bit more into your role. I mean, MillerKnoll, that's incredible, iconic company, and known for its innovative approach to design and workplace solutions. Can you tell us a little bit more about the company's mission and your role in shaping global research and insights there?
Sure. Well, MillerKnoll as a company is fairly new because we created it kind of as this collective of brands that includes the company that I worked at for a long time, Herman Miller. I just mentioned Herman Miller, but also Knoll, which is an incredible modern design leader, and a whole series of other brands. We've got a company called Design Within Reach, which does retail and consumer. We've got companies in Europe like Hay that are well known. And so we brought these companies together just a few years ago, and I was leading research at Herman Miller. And the history there was that back in the 60s, Herman Miller actually created a whole separate group that they called Herman Miller Research Corporation. They stood it up as a separate thing. In fact, they gave the founder of it, Robert Probst, the mandate, go look into all sorts of new innovation ideas, but maybe don't focus on furniture. So the kind of stuff they were looking at was all across the board. And I think a lot of what Herman Miller did really well was thinking about the relationship between people and their environment, in particular ergonomics, the human body, and how comfort can be advanced. And then when we started looking at the history of research and design at Knoll, it was interesting. They started, Florence Knoll, the founder, started this group back in the 40s called Knoll Planning Unit, which was kind of the archetype in some ways for the ways that interior design firms operate their business model now. And so, my easiest way of describing the team that we have now within MillerKnoll is it's a little bit of each. We've got researchers that go look at our physical environments and how they affect us. We've got advisors who provide workplace strategy, but also design recommendations. Like, we don't design full buildings or anything like that, but we can begin to hone in on really specific things like, hey, I want these groups to connect better, or in a healthcare environment, I want to reduce nurse burnout. And we can begin recommending, like, well, here's some ideas for what you can do. And then beyond those groups, we actually have a full time group of speakers that are all around the world sharing our insights, either from stages or in moments like this with you, or sometimes on a more customer by customer basis. So, yeah, altogether, it's like this group that not only does research, but tries to apply it so that the insights we get are derived through practice, not just theory.
That's incredible. And thinking about the timing, I mean, Herman Miller in the 60s, Knoll in the 40s. I mean, is it safe to say they're one of the pioneers of just market research and, I guess, design thinking in general?
Definitely on the topic of design thinking. Interestingly, from a market research standpoint, both companies have had a real strong interest in solving unmet needs, but I would say maybe haven't been as prone to looking at market trends.
Mm,
Both were key in the foundation of what we now consider to be modernism. And without getting too into the detailed history, a lot of this started at this little school in Michigan. I live in Michigan, called Cranbrook, where these amazing designers that include Ray and Charles Eames, if you know, like the Eames chair, it includes
yeah.
Eero Saarinen, St. Louis Arch, but also the Womb Chair, Harry Bertoya. Like, they were all friends, and they had this passion for rethinking how the products and the spaces around us supported people. And a lot of it was around moving away from traditional ornamentation and aesthetics and thinking about what is that relationship between design and the problems that we're trying to solve. And half of them ended up kind of at Herman Miller. The other ended up at Knoll. The two companies competed with each other in a friendly but competitive way for a long time. And so I think when I look back collectively on the history of innovation between those brands, what I think about is originality. I think about having a laser focus on trying to make sure that we're solving problems. We identify what issues we're trying to address, and that we really know our audiences. And then if we know the people we're serving, we know whatever it is we're trying to address for them, that usually is what drives the innovation. But when it comes to some of like the big macro trends happening in the world, or some of the more aesthetic things, actually in some ways the brands have been resilient to that, and ideally have set the stage for that rather than followed.
That's yeah, that's amazing. And if this was a different type of podcast, I'd ask you more about what is it about Michigan and design. I mean, is it is it the weather? Is it people were inside? Like, how do we make it more comfortable?
And,
I
and
I
I'm
don't know.
I
That's interesting.
that's a topic that I would go far down the path on. I won't right now, but I'll just say that I think a lot of people are shocked at just the legacy of design in Michigan. Even brands like Shinola and others are doing just such remarkable things here. But I will say this: one of the real benefits of this approach is that when you try to solve problems in a way that's really well considered, really fully resolved, you tend to have a long tail for what you're able to sell that's very unique. So the fact that Herman Miller's still selling Eames chairs designed in 1956, or that Knoll's still selling Womb chairs, it's very rare to see brands out there that are selling more product today that may have been designed 50 years ago at any point in that history. But that approach to design creates a longevity. I hesitate to use the word timelessness, but in some ways that's what it is. That
Yeah.
is really tough to achieve. But if you do it right, it's incredibly beneficial as a business. It's the opposite of planned obsolescence. It's an
Right.
approach to design that allows you to have an incredible long tail on the things that you design, and that's pretty unique. And I do think that's something that our collective of brands, but other companies in Michigan have focused on doing.
I love that. Yeah. And it's like, if if you got something right, like you got it right, that's great. And I think that's a good segue. I mean, one of the reasons I was most excited to speak to you about was regarding inclusive design. And
Hmm.
um, me being in marketing research, like I'm not necessarily exposed to that when we talk about physical spaces. A lot of the inclusive design we work on is inclusive survey design, right? Inclusive marketing. But I want to talk a little bit, like, from your perspective, one, can you give our listeners maybe a high level, what is inclusive design? What does it entail? And then talk a little bit, I think, specifically about the workplace. I think the especially now, given the trends, working from home, hybrid, that's changing. How do those two things, inclusive design and the future of work, intersect?
Awesome. This is one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to you about this, because there's probably very few topics that excite me as much as this, and it's so core to what we do. And I know that this more inclusive approach to reaching people is core to what you do as well. So I'll start with just a little bit of semantics in that the world of product design and interior design and architecture have worked with this concept of universal design for a long time. And the basic idea there, I mean, I'm kind of simplifying this, is can you create a design that works universally well for everyone? And the most common product that would be cited as an example would be the OXO Good Grips vegetable peeler, designed
Mm,
by a designer who created it primarily for his wife who had severe arthritis. But in taking inspiration from that BMX bike handle or something along those lines, he created a product that was meant to accommodate a unique need, but ended up working so much better than the typical vegetable peeler that everybody adopted it. Well, universal design is a wonderful goal, but it's kind of tough to know how to get there. Like, what's the process? And for me, that's where inclusive design becomes like the complement to it. And it literally means include a much broader group of people in the design, creation, management of something. And it could be a digital user interface, it could be a physical product, it could be an environment. For us, what this means is trying to look at the people that actually use spaces, and it could be home, hospital, office, and understand and observe, that's where ethnographic research comes in, their experiences in these spaces in ways that are rarely done. And if you've ever walked into a space and felt like, oh, I'm at home here, or had the opposite of like, I'm not really sure this space is for me, there are there's this concept of belonging cues. Like, there's things that kind of send a message, like, is this for you? Was this designed for you? When we get into offices, it's really interesting because the roots of office design were really not for the employees. It was all about the leaders expressing their status, having them supervise work. And now
interesting.
it's a totally different game. People can work from anywhere. We've got really low unemployment levels across the US and many other parts of the world. And so organizations are now looking at their physical workplaces going, well, hang on, this isn't just for the leaders. This has got to work for the employees. And ideally, these spaces need to be a tool to help us empower anybody to feel a greater sense of belonging, to feel productive. And so it's really turning the process of place design, of space design on its head in a way that I'm really excited about, partly because we have a really long history in it. So if I go all the way back to some of that early research from Herman Miller as an example, um, the researchers within Herman Miller Research Corporation designed the first ergonomic chair called Ergon. A guy named Bill Stump designed it, um, partly by thinking about the broad range of people that might need to sit in a chair. And it wasn't just like the president of the company, it was at the time secretarial pools and others. There's actually a statue in his honor after his passing at the building that I work from, which shows all of these different body profiles layered on top of each other. So it almost looks abstract, but if you look at it a certain way, it's a celebration of the very wide range of heights and sizes of people that he was considering. And today, we go way beyond just all of those anthropometric and other physical considerations. We're looking at everything from how do people of different socioeconomic backgrounds or different gender identities or others react to environments or products. Most companies have employee resource groups or business resource groups where they've already taken the time to curate people that want to represent some sort of affinity group that they're a part of. They're a wonderful source of input.
Mm.
And they're just ready to go. So like involving them in some of these processes is kind of a slam dunk. And there's other ways to go about it too, but it's shocking how rarely it happens. And in particular, in the world of interior design, when it comes to offices and other facilities, there's been a long-standing history of going to leaders and saying, okay, you lead marketing at XYZ Corporation. What do your people need to work effectively? Well, give me a break. Like, I couldn't say that for my team. How are most people that don't study work supposed to accurately represent that? It's not the best approach. The best approach is to go involve people. And then what you find is that even beyond traditional ways of categorizing underrepresented people, you'll start to see patterns of need that are kind of transversal. So if you're looking at signs on the wall and you use icons instead of a bunch of words, you're going to help somebody with low visual acuity. You're also going to help somebody that doesn't speak English as a first language. Like, you're going to help,
Mm.
everybody's going to appreciate that. So the more you do this, the more you start to see, okay, I've got some patterns here that we can build from.
That's amazing, and it's yeah. I mean, as a founder, as an entrepreneur, and someone thinking about workspaces, and then expanding that out to our clients that we work with, like the impact of thinking like that goes beyond the workspace, right? I mean, that's just such a cool way to look at things, right? And like you mentioned, we're always thinking about inclusivity, but from a marketing perspective. But and one thing that we say a lot is that inclusivity, diversity, it's not just a good thing to do. It makes business sense, and um, to some of the examples that you pointed out, inclusive design, yeah, it's a good thing to do, but it also makes business sense, right? I mean, people are feeling more comfortable. I would imagine there's direct correlations to productivity. Um,
It
I don't
makes
know
a
if you
ton
could
of
speak to
business
that.
sense. Yeah, well, there's so many facets of this that I think we could and should frame in terms of the business case. I think most of us that are super passionate about inclusion and diversity want to start with a societal or social or justice kind of mindset. But hey, we can look at it through a business lens, which is part of which I already said. We've got a really tight labor market. You've got a significant number of people in the talent pool that are potential amazing contributors, but we need to think about equipping them and making sure that they feel a sense of connectedness. When it comes to I'll focus on physical environments for a second. When it comes to the physical environment, it affects our relationship with other people. It affects our sense of psychological safety. It affects physically, literally, our ability to do certain types of work. I have the privilege of hosting our podcast, which is called About Place, and I interviewed retired Senator Tom Harkin, who sponsored the Americans with Disabilities Act, and he told a story on our podcast about how his brother was deaf and managed to find a job in a very noisy production environment where he actually was much more productive because he wasn't dealing with the audio distractions of others. So
Mm.
when you look at this through a lens of who could be great contributors to our organization and what do we need to kind of clear the path for them, I think that makes a ton of sense. But just beyond that, I think there's this idea, if you look at the world of organizational behavior, of discretionary effort. I mean, the idea is that there's like a minimum threshold that you and I need to do to not get fired or have our businesses go out of business or whatever. And then there's this upper bar of like, this is what I'm fully capable of. And the middle ground is discretionary effort. So if you look at somebody who works at an organization, you say, well, what would impact somebody's desire to either give the minimum what was called quiet quitting. I think we're probably past that phrase now. Or give more or the maximum. You can try to force it, but that doesn't really work. It's all about like tapping into their innate desire to be productive and achieve. And a lot of that has to do with whether or not the people around them, they feel like this sense of camaraderie, community. We're in this together. Let's go do this. Otherwise, if you feel like a freelancer at your own business, you just don't feel that sense of inclusion, you're just not likely to give as much. So there's a lot of ways we can justify it from a business standpoint, but I think inclusive design is really smart business.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm with you there, right? I mean, we people working in this space, we tend to think about, the social justice aspect, and I do, and that's what we lead with. But um, at the end of the day, we have to make a case to clients, and so I love hearing the business side of things, and this is, as you were talking about inclusivity, not to get too philosophical or anthropological here, but I feel like early society did a better job of being inclusive of people with different physical abilities, neurodiversity, right? And I'm thinking, I'm thinking, early man, like tribes, like there was just this, there was uh, there was this understanding that we all have different capabilities, and that we weren't necessarily in this box that we are now. And it's like, I feel like inclusive design is this full circle, right? How do we get back to making sure everybody feels a part, like they're contributing, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I definitely think when I think of really healthy communities and tribes historically, you've seen that. And then I can also think of a bunch of examples of the opposite, which is if you
Sure.
were
Being
a baby
optimistic.
born with a defect, you were left out, to the elements. But I think there is generally a loss of community across much of the westernized world. And if you look at people's skyrocketing anxiety levels or sense of loneliness, and there's been substantial research, including from the US Surgeon General, thought they've done a great job on what's part of this. Some of it is this breakdown of who's looking out for me? Who am I looking
Mm.
out for? And we won't get all of that at work, but when you can achieve some of that within a place of employment, it is really special because now you're doing more than just making money. You know what I mean? You're really helping people to come together and do something as a group that hopefully is meaningful to them.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like, right, there's this concept of, what is it, the third space, right? You have
Yeah.
home, work, and the third space. But I guess in some sense, if you're doing it right in the workplace can also serve as a third space, right?
It's so wow, you that's a deep cut, Mario. Well done. Yeah, so Ray Oldenburg, the sociologist, coined this concept of your first place is home, your second place is work, your third place is some place in your community, probably close to your home, where you can really connect with others, and ideally others who don't think and look like you. And so you tend to find this at the pubs in the UK, maybe the coffee shops in Paris, and our approach to suburban development in North America has largely crowded out third places. And you get the big coffee brands and
The
others that
Starbucks drive-through is our third place
I
now.
know, but it's not. So, like, I am quite intentional. For me, I have two places here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. One is a brewery, one is a coffee shop. They're both close to my house. They're both owned by people that I think are making a real big difference in the community. And I have had to seek that out, but it's very difficult to find it. Now, I worked for a while for WeWork, and back in the old WeWork days, there was this theory that maybe work could become a third place. I think it has its limits. I think there are certainly tight knit groups of people or friends within an organization that feel excited about what they're doing and they can gain a sense of community. But personally, I think that third place still needs to be developed in our community. I'm not sure the second place can truly absorb it, but it certainly can be a place of inclusion. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, or a bridge to it.
Yes.
So with that, let's talk a little bit about the future of work, and I know that's a broad topic. It's evolving. How do you see? We touched on it a little bit right now, but how do you see inclusive design influencing the future of work? And I'm curious, like you mentioned, quiet quitting. I think that trend is going away, or we're not talking about it anymore, at least. Um, you know, remote work as we known it. I think it was pretty ubiquitous, obviously, during the pandemic. There was this call to back to office. Now I think we're at a hybrid, but I don't know. I feel like we're figuring it out. So, inclusive design, future of work, what are some trends that you're seeing, and how is inclusive design influencing that?
Sure. Well, if I zoom way out, because we were studying future of work a long time ago. I mean, I started at Herman Miller in 2012, but I was building on a lot of historical research. The first work from home research that Herman Miller had done was in 1993, I think. So if I look at the big trajectories, there's a few things that come to mind. The first one is around flexibility, and that's not new. Employees have wanted more location and schedule flexibility for a really long time. Gallup used to put out these reports, I think they still do, called State of the American Workplace. If you go back, in fact, they released one in January of 2020, right before everything went crazy. If you look, it was all about like, hey, people would like some more flexibility, autonomy. They want to balance their life demands and their work demands better. They'd like to be in the office, but maybe 2 or 3 days a week. They'd like more control over their calendar. There's too many meetings. I mean, it was all there. And
Yeah.
now we've seen it come to the forefront, which is not a bad thing. But the other one that kind of intersects this that I wish the world was talking about more is distributed working. And what I mean by
Mm.
distributed is just taking a team and recognizing that the number of people who are in the same location is probably far less than it was. And this has been going on. This is globalization. It's been going on
Yeah.
forever. But if you look now at most organizations, even small ones, and say how many people are like within the same proximity, let's just say 30-minute proximity to each other compared to 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you tend to find that because you can now hire people from all over the world, you can equip them with tools that allow them to work synchronously and asynchronously. Everybody's just spreading out, and Wi-Fi is really what did this. I mean, the number of people who were working from multiple locations in an era of desktop computing was far lower because you were basically tethered to that piece of equipment. But now that the equipment goes with you, distributed working is the norm. And so when you look at the intersection of those, it kind of paints a picture of in the future, we're going to have more and more teams that are spread out. They might all be in offices, they might all be in homes. That to me is secondary, actually. But they're probably not all in the same place. And with the talent shortage I mentioned before, you're going to be increasingly seeking good talent in locations that maybe you weren't planning. And so, what does this create? Well, it creates, first and foremost, a big management challenge. I mean, forget
Mm.
about the places and the technology, et cetera. It starts with, does anybody know how to manage a team where you've got 3 people in one location and 7 spread across others? How do you make sure this group is connected? How do you make sure that people's voices are being heard, that somebody's not stepping on somebody else's toes, somebody else is being marginalized and not having any of their opinions listened to? Like, to me, that's where it starts. When it comes to physical location, real estate strategy always follows talent strategy. So organizations need to go, all right, well, where are people now? And do we have any sense of where this might be in the future? Where it'll lead, and if I think of some of our customers, I'm thinking about Atlassian as an example, or Shopify, or some of the other companies that we've worked with that have really embraced distributed. It usually leads to kind of a hub and spoke series of workplaces
Mhm.
where you equip people working from home better, and that's something we've extensively researched, but you also create these hubs where people can really connect and do certain activities that are just very difficult to do at home. Um, some of the consulting firms have been doing this for years because their people are spread out with clients, and then they ask them to try to get together on Fridays. To get back to the root of the question, what's the role of inclusive design? Well, you basically have to ditch any assumptions about the sort of work that happens in those sort of spaces, because it's not like people are going to show up and sit at a desk for 7 hours in that sort of instance. That's not what they're there to do. You have to be intentional about talking with teams, being able to say, hey, what sort of experiences are well supported for you today? What are you struggling with? How connected do you feel? When do you feel like you want to spend more quality time together? Or, I mean, I'm thinking about, we have a work from home tool, wfh.hermiller.com. And the last time I looked, I think 52% of people said that they really struggle to focus and have concentrative times at home. So sometimes those hubs need to be all about connecting. And then there's other little parts of them that need to be around. I need 3 hours with this spreadsheet. I'm getting away from all of you. But what I'm getting down to is the work that is supported there has to be understood. And you can't figure it out unless you actually go and engage with and talk to the people that are there. Beyond that, we can get to some more specifics around how different underrepresented groups or others will have even more unique needs in that facility. But what I'm getting at is a bottoms up approach to thinking about all this stuff, which has not been the norm.
I love that, and that was great because I mean, we've been a distributed team since day one, so we have, and I feel like you're hitting exactly on our organization. So we're here based out of Burbank in Los Angeles, but it's only 4 or 5 of us that come here regularly. We have 50 plus team members all across the U.S., Mexico, India, Colombia, um, and we're intentional with our meetups. We have, well, we're pretty, being in Southern California, we're pretty close to Mexico, so we try to go quarterly, um, annually in Asia. But this hub and spoke approach, you got me thinking that's needed, right? I mean, you have these meetups, and it's always so great to see everybody in person. But how do you do that more regularly, right?
See, I think
Yeah,
so many organizations can learn from what you just said, because I actually find this the organizations that are most distributed or that originate as remote first companies, they usually have a clear sense of why they get together, what they're going to do, and the value of it. Then
yeah,
organizations are just like, well, show up to the office. You know,
yeah,
do whatever you were going to do at home, but in the office, like that doesn't make sense. Like there
yeah,
should be a purpose.
for sure. Yeah, so I was just in India in January. And it's just for us, it's just having the conversations, meeting people person to person. You just learn things about their day to day, about their jobs, about what they're going through that you could never get in a phone call where you're like, "Hey, what's going on? Anybody need help?" It's different, and I think that touches on on inclusive design, and that communication styles are different. There's cultures that are comfortable calling and zooming and talking about some issues, and there's cultures that are not, that need
That's certainly true.
that person communication to get some matters that they maybe feel is not conducive in a digital environment to share.
Yeah, I think what we'll continue to see is this balance between a smart real estate strategy, but also a decent travel budget that allows people to, if they're very distributed teams, to get together a little bit more regularly. I'm thinking of a couple of customers we work with who have built these kind of regional hubs. And not every organization can do this, but they've given their team leaders decent travel budget to get people together. Some team members might find that they're either meeting on a more local basis or somewhere farther quite regularly with others, even though maybe that's not their primary work mode. Others might find, like, if let's just say it's an organization where half their employees are in some metro market, maybe Seattle, and others are distributed elsewhere, they might find that they need to take some of their space and not have it just be a row of desks for everybody to sit in all day long, but they need to build like an internal event space so that part of
Mhm.
their space is there to serve all those other team members, and that just invigorates the people who work there locally. Like, well, who's in this week? Like, let's go see who's there and check it out. There's a balance there, but realistically, a lot of organizations are very early. Most did not have a distributed working strategy. You did, but most didn't before the pandemic. And I don't think a lot of organizations even realized kind of these changes were underway. If you go back and you look at the badge swipes and the space utilization data and all of the metrics around space use, you can see it changing for years and years and years. It's just that people treated it as we have office workers, we have teleworkers. And like, well, that's way too black and white. You've got people
Yeah.
that are working in a wide variety of locations. The big question is, what are they trying to do together? Like, who are they trying to spend time with, and what can be done remotely and asynchronously, and what other things do you really just benefit from getting in a room for a couple of days, making a mess, making some decisions, having some hugs and a meal together, and then moving on and seeing each other in another month or two. Like, that's what organizations when I think of the future of work, are going to need to figure out a lot better than they have today. Some have, most haven't.
I love that thinking because the hub and spoke, okay, sure, that's a piece of it. But I think the most important piece that you touched on is figuring out what is that team in that market going to use that space for. Is it work? They have trouble concentrating and they just want to come in a couple of days to work, or are they fine? They're productive, but they want to come in to get messy, have a meal. You got me thinking, so I might take that from you.
Well, I left this industry briefly to go to a SaaS, software as a service company that was focused on like desk booking, other things. We ended up selling that company to WeWork. That's why I was there. But if I look at software as a service as a business model, it's so fascinating to me because the people who attend to the product have so much data to see what people are doing with the product. So that
Mm-hmm.
relationship between the product owner and the product user is such a dynamic relationship. And in a lot of ways, it's the opposite of any sort of physical real estate, where somebody in theory designs a space that's supposed to work like for the duration of a lease for 10 years or whatever, and then they're gone before people even hardly get their boxes unpacked. And so there are some organizations that have begun thinking about their workspace as a product to be managed. And the only way to do it is to start having some of those focus groups or the occasional survey or just walking around. Hey, tell me about how your team's working now compared to a few years ago. Anything you feel like you need to do that requires you to leave our space, or what do you wish you could do if you were in our space together? Sometimes I refer people to Priya Parker's book, The Art of Gathering, which is just like a way of rethinking why do we get together with other human beings. But that's kind of what needs to happen. Our teams, like I'm just finishing another round of this with my team, we use something called team working agreement. There's others that have done this very successfully, but it basically is a chance to empower team leaders to say, go talk to your teams, ask them some questions around how we're working, what needs to be improved, should we be spending better quality time together, is your level of flexibility working for you, just like doing a gut check on all these things. What we find often is that people are actually frequently spending a lot of time alone, working from home, which is not a bad thing. But if it gets to the point of loneliness, social isolation, not feeling a sense of belonging, that has to be addressed. And so I actually find that those conversations have been way more impactful than the typical return to office mandate, which just feels like everybody go there. But when it's no, how can we figure out this balance better? Then it's something that's, I think, much more purposeful.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a backlash. These mandates have been having a backlash, like and
There is. Have you ever heard
so
the term reactance theory?
no.
It's a psychological concept that it basically means if you tell somebody to do something and they perceive it as a loss of autonomy, they will do the opposite. So it's none of us want to be told to go do this or that. And anytime you slap the word mandate behind something, mask mandate, vaccine mandate, return to office mandate, you're going to see some portion of the people be like, So I've seen organizations that instead of trying to have it be some sort of top down mandate, who just engage their employees in a level of conversation on, hey, we value your flexibility. Number one, we want to be empathetic, inclusive managers. So if you've got a doctor's appointment with mom on Thursday, we're going to say, yeah, go take her. But it's more around like, how can we really work effectively as a community? And when organizations take that, I think they get a lot farther. And by its nature, it's inclusive because you're kind of saying, I don't think I know the best way for all of us to operate. Like we're going to have to figure this out together. But I get it. It's a struggle for. It's kind of like cleaning out your closets. You got to throw all that crap on the ground and then reorganize it. And a lot of that work is daunting for organizations, but the ones that have done it, I think they're far more agile, resilient, and equipped to deal with any sort of change that comes their way because their teams are already talking about how can we work better. I think that's a good thing. I think organizations should want their teams having those conversations.
Agreed, agreed. And believe it or not, we're almost at the end of our time, and I do want to ask one more question though, and it's a little bit selfish, but I have a daughter, a 10-year-old daughter, who's taken an interest in interior design, and um, which is great. She's like, she's an artist and just, I don't know,
Mm.
she's just into it. But one of the things that I'm worried about is AI, and
Oh,
I know a lot of our listeners are grappling that in the marketing and market research. Is AI a threat to interior designers as a career, or is it a tool like it is for many other things? I mean, how are you all dealing with AI and its impact in interior design, right? Like I'm looking at these apps where it's like take a picture and we'll design it. So I don't know. Is that at a threat of being lost to AI, or do you think there'll always be a human element involved?
I think there will always be a human element involved. Having said that, I guess I'm quoting IBM when I say I don't think AI will take their jobs, but designers who know the AI tools will.
Mm,
So I think a spirit of experimentation, understanding what tools are available. As you know, AI does a pretty good job of dealing with rote, complicated processes that people are not good at. So, in theory, I know this is theoretical, it should free the designer to be more creative and more human centered. That's not to say that there won't be some impact on that job market, but when I think of commercial interior design, so if your daughter, in when she gets to be my daughter's age and she's picking a school, wants to think about designing offices, hospitals, restaurants, etc., there is a technical side to that. You need to understand fire code, you need to understand egress, and I think a lot of the tools can be really helpful. And I'll say that we first built code on top of Autodesk's generative design platform 7 or 8 years ago. So we have software products that are AI enabled. We have for a while that can
mm,
assist designers in doing some of this. But there's still that human side. When it comes to residential design, like if you're talking homes, half of that battle is that rapport and relationship between the designer and the people they're serving. And
mm,
I know we're nearly at time, but getting back to this idea that you have to ask, if you tell a computer, go design a dining room, it's probably going to think about the size of the table, the number of chairs, and whether or not you can store, dishes in the little buffet. When you talk to people about their dining room, it's where they do board games. It's
mhm.
occasionally a place to work. It's where they're going to have drinks with friends when they come over. It might become a project zone if you've got a garage sale around the corner. Like you have to understand at such a personal level things that people often don't make explicit. Like the part of the challenge is you have to understand them well enough to get to these things that they might not be able to articulate. So can AI help us get there? Yeah, I think so. But no, to me, the human, creative, user-centered side of design will still provide a lot of job opportunities in the future.
Yeah, and I think it's that was a left field question, but I think it is really apropos of our conversation, right? I think it's going to be difficult for AI to also think about the use cases like you mentioned with the dining room and its the various uses, but also the inclusive aspect of it when we're talking about inclusive design. I mean, that's going to be very difficult for AI
I think
uh,
so,
to
given
think through as
the
well.
risk of bias in so many of
Right.
these algorithms. Because this is so, if I were to be able to chat with your daughter in the future, the advice I would give her is a great designer is not making a signature statement that reflects them. They're creating a space or a product or something that uniquely addresses the needs of the people they're solving for. I'm guessing in your world you've probably seen the book A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander. I mean, one of the great works of human-centered design. Some architects don't love it. It kind of makes to the point that, well, like who designed a barn? Nobody, everybody. Thousands of people, millions of people over thousands of years designed the barn because it's the perfect structure for what a barn needs to be. Good designers look for patterns. They try to tailor it to the people they serve. And when it comes to AI, if somebody's going to write an algorithm that says this is what the design should be, they're putting themselves as the authority. Whoever's writing
Mm.
that code is the ultimate designer. Sorry, that's not great design to me. Like you got to go figure out who you're serving, what they're trying to do, and then apply that. And I think there will always be room for humans to do that better.
I love that. I think that's a great place for us to end. Thank you so much, Ryan. This was fantastic. We could have spent a whole podcast on any one of these questions, so that was great. And thank you everybody for listening. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interest, lots of questions. I started following you on LinkedIn. You've already shared some great stuff. If people want to follow you and learn more about your work, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yep, definitely on LinkedIn, Ryan Anderson, or at MillerKnoll.com under the Insights tab.
Great. Thanks again, and thank you everybody for listening.
Thanks, Mario. This was fun.
Thanks to everyone listening in. To get more multicultural insights, check us out at thinknow.com and follow us on social media. You can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform.